Hi, I'm Andy Shalal. I'm the owner of Busboys and Poets. We are so happy to have Rock Newman and the Rock Newman Show join our tribe here. We are a tribe. This is a place where racial and cultural connections are consciously uplifted, a place where art, culture, and politics intentionally collide. This is a space to take a deliberate pause and feed your mind, body, and soul. We believe by creating such a space, we can actually change our community, change DC, and change the world for the better. And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Folks, welcome to the Rock Newman Show from Busboys and Poets Live. Today is Saturday, November the 16th, 2013. I appreciate you tuning in today. I would strongly, let me say strongly one more time, suggest to you and to all of your friends that you call friends and or family to tell them to tune into the Rock Newman Show today at rocknewmanshow.com. Tonight, this show is going to be rebroadcast on 1480 AM in the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area because we have an action-packed, great show with some great personalities, some Washington, D.C. icons. We here at the Rock Newman Show are interested in trying to make the world a better place, and we don't apologize for that being our agenda. We also have an agenda that highlights all aspects of Washington, D.C. We want to export the culture of Washington, D.C. We here in the D.C. metropolitan area are consumers of media really from around the world. We look at shows that come from other places. This is a show, the Rock Newman Show, that we intentionally import all that's good, great, and wonderful about Washington, D.C., and we also tackle some of the tough issues. Let me run down the lineup for today's show. First, we have Ron Moten, who is the co-founder of Pizzaholics and the author of Drinking Muddy Water, a book that details much about DC, Washington, D.C. politics and beyond. Also, we have William Kellibrew, who has an incredibly riveting personal story. He is with the he's an international advocate for civil rights, women, children, and victim rights. Wait until you hear both of these men's story. It is something absolutely fascinating, and I very much appreciate and am honored to have them on the show today. In the 10 o'clock hour, we have none other than Willie Jolly, attitude and achievement expert. Willie Jolly annually is voted as one of the top speakers on the speaking circuit anywhere in the world. He is an absolutely dynamic individual with an incredible message. And if you have any folks out there sort of down on the dumps, not feeling so good about themselves or their lives, and they want to kind of get a kick in the butt to get up and do what they need to do to take that first step of a journey that's 1,000,000 miles, tune in that 10 o'clock hour, and Willie Jolly will help you with that. In the third hour, a name from New York undercover that you all might remember, a gentleman named Malik Yoba. He's an actor, an entrepreneur, a musician, a writer, and a healer. And we'll talk to him about all of that and exactly what he's doing today. All of his days there at the New York as a New York undercover cop on TV. He was voted year after year. He won NAACP honors. Malik Yoba, an accomplished actor, will be in the studio with us today. But right now, let us go to the two guests, Ron Moten and William Kellibrew. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
You know what I'm going to do first, Ron, since you're sitting closest to me? I'm going to go to you first. You have a book called Drinking Muddy Water. And in that book, you have a chapter called Hurt People, Hurt People.
Yes, sir.
Tell us all about it. How did you come up with that title, and what does it mean?
Well, when we had the Pizzaholics for like 7 years, me and Jahad did trips to Birmingham, Alabama, Mississippi, Atlanta, and we were blessed to meet people like Reverend James Bevel and Amelia Bolkins Robinson, who was the mother of the Civil Voting Rights Act. and Pastor Boone, who just died, and Orange, and all those soldiers you don't hear about who really were the foot soldiers of King, who organized the people and the children to help end segregation. And one of the things that he told us, you know, hurt people hurt people. Because I used to talk about all the things that were happening in our communities, and I was like, I didn't understand why some of the things happened. And he would say, you know, he was a social scientist, and he would say, well, one thing that people don't understand is hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
And, you know, I wrote about this in the book because I started seeing this. You know, in my community, when we started dealing with these shootings, and we deal with all these heinous crimes that happen, when you go back and start from the beginning of the story, you know, when that child or that adult was born, and you look at their journey in life, most of them went through a traumatic experience, a horrific experience in their life, and they never got services. They never got mental health services. They never got any love. Right. And when something happens, like, for instance, in Montgomery County and other places, whether it's a drunk driver killing a student, the students get services even though no one was shot or anything.
Right.
Then you go with the children that we worked with, and people have been raped, people have been shot, their friends have been shot, their parents have been shot, and they never got any services, and that anger stays within. And at some point it comes out. Now, how people deal with it is differently.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And in that chapter, I talk about, you know, people who I mentored, who, for instance, this one situation where these young guys, right, and their father was killed in front of them on a playground by a rival crew, right?
Yes.
Years later, over a decade later, one of them was locked up for killing somebody at that same spot on the playground.
Wow.
And another brother was locked up for, I know you remember the big story in D.C. when a young college student was riding his bicycle home from work, and he was killed, you know, was allegedly killed by another brother. And I go, it's four of them.
Who had that kind of hurt,
right.
so
and they
history
never,
repeating itself.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So, but we don't talk about this, you know.
You know, Ron, when you say you don't talk about it, what I want my listening audience to know, if anybody is tuning in and you don't know of Ron Moten, Ron co-founded an organization called Peaceaholics. And Peaceaholics is an organization that goes into the city that does work, oftentimes not nearly given the credit that it should have for helping to save children's lives and making the community a safer place. I personally have witnessed the kind of work that they do, where there is gang intervention, where it's about to go down. Somebody is about to get hit. Somebody is about to get shot. Somebody is about to get killed. And this group, Peaceaholic, Ron Moten, and his compadres will go up into the middle of the beef and attempt as best they can to quash the beef, to stop the killings. I don't know if we ever have enough words in the dictionary to thank you for that kind of work. Now, Ron Moten, I want to get into somewhat your personal journey. You have certainly done a lot. You've been very transparent about what your life story has been, and we want to come back to that in a minute and really talk about hurt people hurting people. Okay. This William Kellibrew, thank you very much for joining us here on the Rock Newman Show. Your story is such an incredible story, and folks, in the spirit of full transparency, we had a guest booked who we were really excited about, Dr. Melanie Macklin. I want to say to her, our heart goes out to you. She had a serious leg injury and could not make it to the show this morning, and we got late notice about that yesterday. And I was at a conference, a Rainbow Push conference with Jesse Jackson and a number of other people on a panel speaking yesterday, and was due to meet Ron. In the hallway, I saw William Kellibrew, and we started talking. We had met each other several years back. It was at that moment that Ron also saw Kellibrew, and they said hello. Ron had been telling me the story about Kellibrew and sort of the tragedy that he witnessed, the violence that he was subjected to, Ron was telling me that he didn't know if Kellibrew knew that the person that killed Kellibrew's brother and mother was dating Ron's mother at the same time. So yesterday, at the Hilton Hotel at 16th and K Street, this was revealed for the first time, and you guys have known each other for a very long time. So, Kellibrew, let's get into this. And let me tell you about William Kellibrew. He's been on events with Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby has sought him out, has showcased him and his story. He's been on the Oprah Winfrey Show for such a riveting story and a recovery from such an incredible tragedy. Take us back. You were 9 years old. Your mother was dating a gentleman who had come out of prison. I think he had a murder or something in his past.
Yeah, actually, thank you for having me on, Rock, and good to see you as well, Ronald. The Marshall, he had killed someone on the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, in 1971, and he served 11 and a half years in prison. He was also charged with desertion, so he's convicted of that from the military. Mm-hmm. And so he served 11 and a half years in 2 federal penitentiaries, and he got out in the early 80s, and somewhere along that line, he met my mom.
Right.
And so we met her in Capitol Heights, Maryland, where we lived, and she brought him home.
Capitol Heights, Maryland, by the way, is just across the border
right.
of Washington, D.C. Yeah.
And she brought him home. I mean, he was the nicest guy. In fact, he gave me some money. It was some coins. I think I went to go buy penny candy, but he was.
So when you first met him, you were 7, 8, 6?
I was 9.
Oh, so
this happened in a matter of months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It probably took about 7 months.
Right.
But their relationship, it was great in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then there was violence, and he started holding her hostage or keeping her away from the home for days at a time. She had 5 children. We had 5. There were 5 of us, range from 5 all the way to 14 years old.
Right.
And so she was a single parent, and we started to notice different things. Bruises on her started to show up, and our diets changed. It was something living with him and the control that he had.
Mm-hmm. So he moved in the house with you guys.
Basically, yeah.
Uh-huh. And the house rules all became his. He was very domineering.
Exactly. They really became his. So if they showed up at home together late and there were dishes in the sink, he woke me up in the middle of my sleep with a hose, and he beat me. And it was like a night and day situation with him.
Mm-hmm. Were there things that you noticed that triggered this kind of behavior, or was it just you saw was it willy-nilly?
Well, we often find that in domestic violence situations or domestic violence relationships, that power and control are 2 major factors. So when Marshall's power was tested, he would become violent. When he didn't have control of a situation, and he would also become violent. There's 3 universal triggers that I always talk about, in the mental health field. And one is the feeling of loss of control, and one is a power differential where one person has power over another person, and the other one is lack of predictability. When you don't know what's going to happen in the next moment, it can be triggering. It can be a traumatic reminder.
Mm-hmm. So this relationship you saw fairly quickly after this guy moved in and was your mother's boyfriend for that time. There was some violence. As you said, you started to see some bruises, see some changes. And what brought you to that just horrifically tragic day?
My mom wanted to leave the relationship, and what she didn't understand probably was that when you want to leave a relationship during violence, it is the most lethal time. It's the most injurious. So when you want to leave and say you're going to leave, what happens around that point is a very violent and stormy interaction. Mm-hmm. And so it was no different for her.
Let me ask you, before you go into the incident, mm-hmm. I think you bring up a point that I want to stay mm-hmm. focused on. So for the woman man, child, or otherwise that might be out there looking into at the show right now, if you've determined that you know you have to leave, then is it best to just, break camp without any announcement or telling? Because if you're saying that that's a violent time when, I guess, the perpetrator becomes aware that you might change, that their power might no longer exist. So how do you advise, because you've become an expert, how do you advise, what do you advise folks to do in that condition?
Well, one of the things is, not to change the situation, to know that the perpetrator wants power, needs power, and if you change the worldview, and Dr. Richard Malika talks about this, that the worldview or the intent of the perpetrator is to ensure that the victim or survivor doesn't survive and recover. And so if that's the case, you're not to survive and recover out of that situation. And so what you want to do is you want to look to safety planning. You want to know that you can Google safety planning for domestic violence. You can Google it, but oftentimes, perpetrators, they're very savvy when somebody wants to have power. So they'll be looking at your email cookies. They'll be looking at things. So this is really best to do in private. And so no one should know that you're planning to leave unless you've sought out professional help. And there's in DC, there's lots of organizations who can focus on safety planning, like the DC Coalition Against Domestic Violence. You can also email us at the William Kellibrew Foundation at www.thewkfoundation.org. In fact, I brought our executive director here today as well, Malik Washington. And so when you email us, we can direct you to some safe services.
I want to tell my production crew that we're going to forego the first break we have. We'll come back for the second one because I want to stay with this.
Okay.
I want to stay with this. You have that kind of trauma going on in a situation. So you just gave advice so someone can dial up and say, what's that? An escape to safety? What is it called again?
Safety plan.
Safety plan. And so you can actually dial that when you're in a domestic violent kind of situation.
Well, you can Google it and you can look
I'm
at safety
saying
plan.
I'm in Google.
Right.
Yes.
There
Okay.
are many kinds of safety plans. I mean, obviously, but for domestic violence victims or survivors, you want to plan your escape. So my mom was probably back then better off saying, I'll stay in the relationship. You don't have to worry about anything. We're together to the end. Even if she said Bonnie and Clyde, it's you and me.
Yeah.
And again, the trigger for that.
To say that, but make a plan for escape.
Absolutely. Where your children are involved. I would say to look at a lot of safety plans, and because it's financial planning, there's a bank account you may want to have on the side. There's all kinds of things that you need to move. You always have your bag packed. In fact, I'll tell you something. I was at a high school, and I have young people write on the cards what their barriers are, and then on the other side, so how they're going to solve that barrier. Well, one of the cards that I got once said that I'm afraid because every night my mom and all of our children, so my mom and us, we always have our bags packed and ready to go. That's how dangerous it was at that home.
Ron, before William gets into telling the details of that horrific experience of his, part of the reason I wanted both of you on here at the same time is because I think that the experiences and the work that you have done with what are oftentimes the victims of violence and the perpetrators of violence, and as you detail it in your book, hurt people. Does that resonate with you in terms of what he's saying, in terms of the control that the typical perpetrator wants to have?
Yeah, but the thing about it, the hurt perpetuates this type of behavior, and these people who are hurting people, they were hurt, so now they try to impose their will on other people, trying not to hurt them. It was a gay gang I was dealing with in D.C. I told you about, called Check It.
Yes.
At one time, they were bullies.
Yeah.
They became the bullies.
Yeah.
And that's the behavior. That's what happens. It's called Check It right here in D.C.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand, if we don't deal with the problem, we keep on having this violence in America.
And that group was consisted of many females, right?
Females, transgender, and men, gay men. and they were down Chinatown and other places, making people go crazy. The businesses were going crazy. They couldn't make money.
Yeah.
I mean, but it started off with them
Being bullied.
and put out of a high school, done by a senior high school.
Right.
And in Trinidad, in the Trinidad community, and then it grew to like 200 members throughout the community.
Right.
Because nobody addressed the problem of them being bullied. And this happens with different guys that were in gangs and crews.
Yeah.
They always bullied. They always getting jumped going to school or whatever. They bond together. Next thing you know, they're doing the same thing to somebody else.
Yeah.
Another thing that happens, people are raped and molested. And then they become people who rape and molest people.
Right.
And even with the story that he's about to tell, I didn't find out till like 5 years ago that this man tried to sexually molest my sister.
The same person.
The same person. And me and my sister and my mother barely made it out the house when he was about to kill my mother. So
I really want to hear about that. But part of what you speak to is what seems to me should be the need and the priority.
Right.
That any municipality, and right now we're talking about,
Right.
D.C. and the surrounding areas, should put much more focus, resources, and funding into mental health.
I'll give you a prime example.
Please do.
What you're saying, Rock. So when we do these workshops at schools, it never fails. If we are in an auditorium and we have 100 children in the auditorium, and we say, how many of you all have had a friend or close family member killed or affected by violence, right? Every hand goes up. When you ask them, how many of you have received any type of services or counseling to deal with that? Out of 100 people, maybe 5 hands will go up.
Right.
That's what you're dealing with.
So you got 95. You got 95 of the kids who are hurt, and now more prone to hurt.
And then if you do the dynamics, okay, out of these 95 children, how many of them are being raised by single parents? How many of them don't have a meal every day? How many of them go to school and see other children with something that they don't have? How many of them started off slow with their education and don't have good comprehension skills? Mm-hmm. All this stuff plays a part in violence.
Yeah.
And most people don't understand. If I can't, digest what's going on around me, and I don't have the communication skills to deal with things, it makes me more likely to be violent.
Yeah.
Instead of being a good parent, instead of being in a good relationship to discipline someone, or in a relationship with a child, or with somebody when I'm with a female and she says something I don't like, instead of talking it out, I go to what I know, violence. Because I never dealt with it or I can't communicate. So all these things are left out of the equation when we talk about solving the problem of violence in our community. We always react to something that happened.
Okay. You and your mother and your sister escaped what might have been a fatal experience.
Yes.
Tell us about that prior to going to William, before I go back to William.
Well, what happened was my mother met William through a friend who was going to see somebody else locked up. Anybody know the jail thing? A lot of times women meet men in prison through another friend who's going to see somebody in prison.
Sure.
And so she used to go and see him. I believe it was in Petersburg. I forgot where he was locked up at.
Right.
But my mother would go see him.
Right.
And so when he came home, he came up to my house. My mother was doing well. She was in a program called Wider Opportunity for Women. She was working. She was taking care of us.
Right.
And the next thing I know, like he said, it became violent. It went from this great man always buying us stuff.
They started having a relationship.
Yes.
He started providing to some extent.
Yeah,
Right.
getting us, bring us candy, toys, and stuff, and it was nice.
Right.
And this guy was handsome man with curly hair, sculptured like a African warrior.
So a ladies' man.
Oh, no question.
Yeah. No, he was.
Am I right?
Right.
He was sculptured.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the next thing I know, it became violent. So.
And you were how old at this time?
I was, I had to be around about 10 years old. I think around 10.
Right.
And the thing was, I was going back and forth from my grandmother's house. When things didn't go well, I was like, I gotta go.
Right.
My sister was clinging to my mother.
Right.
So
how old was she?
She's 3 years, so she had to be so I had to be about 10. She was like 7.
Okay.
And when I found out 5 years ago that this man tried to sexually molest my sister, I always wondered why my mother and my sister relationship was so bad, because my sister wasn't that type of person.
Right.
And she really didn't have a lot to say to my mother until they worked this out recently, like within the last 5 years. And so this guy affected him in the short and long term, and he affected me in the short and long term because this affected my sister for the rest of her life.
Because your sister obviously was aware of what he was trying to do. He was trying to molest her.
Right.
She shared it with your mother, but your mother was so enamored with him.
Right, exactly.
She disavowed what your sister was saying, and your sister held on to some intense resentment.
Exactly.
That is tragic in itself.
Exactly. And then when we escaped, my mother, me and my sister got out the house, and my mother finally got away that day through the fire escape too, and she dislocated her shoulder.
Was he after her?
Oh yeah, he like he was saying, he was in control. He ran this. He didn't want to let us out.
Right.
You know, and we could have been killed.
Yeah.
Because that's how he operated. And then we found out this guy was a hitman. Later on, I mean, we found out a lot of things about it. I didn't know he was a black belt. I didn't know he was. I mean, this guy could kill people with his hands. He was trained to kill.
Yeah. And so you all escaped. And unfortunately, William, you did, but your mother and older brother, didn't. You were 9 years old. Your older brother was 12 years old. Your mother and your mother was there. You witnessed this, and you've gone through your journey and gotten to a place where you can share what that horrific day was like. Please do.
Yeah, you know, before I get there, I want to just sort of reiterate this hurt people. In fact, Dr. Sandy Bloom uses the sanctuary model. She talks about hurt people. What's behind hurt people? The humiliation is a very stark thing in terms of what people are dealing with. In fact, we say that Malika said that behind every act of violence, there's humiliation. And so that humiliation is perpetuated. When you don't address it, when you don't resolve trauma, that's what happens. Now, to paint a picture for Marshall Brent Williams, you know, we look at him as the perpetrator, but and my mother's the victim, but what they have in common is trauma. Yeah. Marshall's come from a traumatic background. Just serving 11 and a half years could be traumatic for him. Right. You know, where somebody locked him up and had all the control. When he gets out, he sort of can overcompensate. I mean, he now has to have control because he lost control. Right. So I watched this play out in that room, the control he had. So my mom said, I want to leave you and I want to be with just my kids. My grandmother shared the story with me, how my mother told her, she told him, I just want to be with my kids and I don't want to be in the relationship anymore. And that's where a lot of the storminess also took place.
So that was the trigger. That was an announcement.
That was an announcement. I'm going to leave you. I'm going to change your worldview. And the worldview for Marshall was, if I cannot have you, nobody else can. And my mother didn't understand that this was a trigger for him.
Yeah.
It triggered him.
And she made that announcement. You were in the room. Your brother was...
Well, I didn't hear her make the announcement. Yeah. She made that announcement, and then she went on the run. Yeah. And so she was hiding from him one night. And so this week of trying to dodge him and get away from him, and he found her a few blocks away. In fact, my sister tells me that Marshall asked them, where was your mom? And they said, my mom is at this particular place. And so he went around there, and then he held a gun against one of her friends' head, and then he dragged my mother out of the car, and then he dragged her for about 3 blocks before bringing her in the house.
So he brings her in the house. Is your brother's in the house with her then, or is he? Where is he?
Well, as they were coming down the street, Marshall was dragging her down the street, but he was trying to pull her back the other way. He's 12 years old, so he's no match for a Marshall who's very strong.
So your 12-year-old brother was trying to pull her back.
Right. And I want to say, in terms of the listeners, I don't like to open up wounds and not do anything about it. And so if you're hearing this and this is troublesome or a traumatic reminder for your listeners or for you, you can reach us at thewkfoundation.org, and we will direct you to services.
That bears saying, because we do want to have that sensitivity. So if someone is out there right now that is watching us right now, will be listening tonight, how can they get help?
Yeah, well, you go to www.thewkfoundation.org and send us an email at info@thewkfoundation.org, and we will direct you to services here. We're part of the DC Victims Assistance Network here. Many of the organizations who provide direct services, but we don't provide direct services, but we do have the relationships.
Okay. So, William, right now, what's his name? What's the perpetrator's name?
Marshall.
Marshall is dragging your mother. Your 12-year-old brother is trying to hold her.
Trying to pull her back up the street by her waist.
Right, and he's no match for
He's
a big
no
man.
match. He's pulling her down the street, and as I look out, in fact, she was screaming. That's how I woke up that morning. I got up, went to the window, looked out, saw her being dragged down the street. And frankly, I've seen so much violence between them and between my mom's relationships in the past. So I was conditioned in a sense. So I went upstairs to get something to eat, and when I came back downstairs, I looked outside the door, and there they were. I didn't think they saw me, so I closed the door and I locked it.
Right.
And I sat down and played with these Matchbox cars that were sitting right there. And then all of a sudden, I heard a knock on the door, banging on the door.
Right.
And as I looked through the window pane, my mom was standing there, my 12-year-old brother, Marshall. And so I opened the door, and when they came in, my mother, she went to the window, and she was yelling out to the onlookers and the bystanders who were outside. And my brother just stood against the wall, and Marshall turned around, turned his back to them, and then he just took out a gun and he started loading it bullet by bullet.
What was do you remember what your mother was yelling?
Absolutely, call the police, call the police is exactly what she was yelling that day.
So Marshall had what kind of, did he have a pistol or shotgun?
A pistol.
So he turned his back to them, and you saw him loading the bullets.
Correct. He was facing me.
And then?
Well, I'll just kind of move through the room, but he proceeded to kill everybody in the room.
What was it, how do you think you got spared?
You know, there's an interesting dynamics in the room, and I go to those dynamics because I think it's important to understand what's behind sort of behavior. You know, when we talk about all behavior has meaning.
Yeah.
My mom fought that day, which I think, fighting for your life, that was her instinct. And she wasn't wrong for that.
Yeah.
I think she's very validated in fighting for her life that day. But again, understanding that the feeling of loss of control for Marshall is a trigger.
Yeah.
And so the more you fight, the more power you try to take for yourself,
Yeah.
he's going to advance his power.
Yeah.
And that morning, my mother, before getting shot, she yelled at him, "No," was her last words to him, as loud as she could yell. And that was, just still struggling in that situation. And so I watched the dynamics of control play out very closely.
Yeah.
When he shot my brother was silent. He didn't respond to him. He didn't look at him. He put his leg on the wall. His arms were folded, and he didn't respond. But he was a threat. He probably was a perceived threat for Marshall because he was helping my mom.
Yeah.
And then when he came to me, he squatted in front of me, and he put the gun to my head, and he had me beg for my life. And so I just said to him as fast as I could say, "Please don't kill me, please don't kill me, I'll do anything." And then when he didn't respond, I looked up to the ceiling, and I had my hands together, and I was doing a little prayer. "God, please don't let him kill me, please don't let him kill me, I'll do anything." Now, what I think happened in that moment is interesting. I didn't understand it then as a child, and children have a worldview that's shaped by their environment. Yeah. And I did not understand what happened back then. But as I work in the field of mental health and victims assistance, I learn about this piece on trauma and on these dynamics in the room. And so what I think happened, to answer your question about Marshall in this situation, I first like to say that I grew up with a lot of faith, and I think that God played an amazing role in my survival in that one moment especially. And secondly, that Marshall, I'd like to think that humanity came into the room. When we look at Marshall wasn't a bad guy. I don't think Marshall was a bad guy. I think Marshall didn't have any good coping strategies. I think you either choose to pick up a gun or go take a jog. Marshall, you should go take a jog. And many people who commit crimes or perpetrators, like you said, 30% of the caregivers who are abused as children may go on later to abuse others. It's 30%. So most of the people, 70%, don't do that.
Right.
So that's key to note. And that Marshall had a bit of mercy that morning. And so the goodness, the humanity piece for him, you've got to, I'm staring down the barrel of a gun and looking into a guy's eyes. And I would like to think that anybody who's got a gun up to a 10-year-old's head would consider this moment. But, I think about Jennifer Hudson's nephew. He was 10 years old, and he was shot in that SUV.
Yeah.
And I must think that killer looked at Jennifer Hudson's nephew at 10 years old. He pulled the trigger, and he killed him.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to be alive.
Yeah.
I know that it could be very differently, but I had no. Something. It was interesting. There's a concept, emerging practice called trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practices. And I'd like to think that as a kid, maybe I was doing this whole trauma-informed practices piece, had no idea. But
Sure.
Trauma-informed care is really about being sensitive to the other person's feelings and how they feel. And so, as a 10-year-old, I was giving Marshall control. I have no idea why that was, but I played I was no threat to him.
Yeah. Whatever level of personal development and spiritual development I've gained, I'm not far enough there yet that I'm sad that he then killed himself. Mm-hmm. He killed himself in the room that day.
Yes.
You saw that also.
Well, no, he let me go.
Oh, he let you go.
Thank God.
And then it was found out that he then committed suicide.
Yeah, 10 years later, actually, I found out that he killed himself right after I left by going over CBS footage, actually. That's when I found out.
Folks, we'll be right back.
My baby drives a Pohanka cup.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the Markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a Pohanka cup.
to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Folks, welcome back to the Rock Newman Show. Today is Saturday, November the 16th, 2013. In studio with me right now is Ron Moten. He's the co-founder of Peaceaholics and the author of Drinking Muddy Water. Also, William Kellibrew, who is an international advocate for civil, human, women, children, and victims' rights. Coming up in the 10 o'clock hour, we will have none other than His Honor. And it is a great honor to have him, Willie Jolly, our attitude and achievement expert. And if you want to feel good, make sure you and all your friends are tuned in to this 10 o'clock hour. And then in the 11 o'clock hour, actor extraordinaire, New York undercover star for many, many years, Malik Yoba, who's an actor, entrepreneur, musician, writer, and healer. We're going to ask Malik about that healing part. That's important. We're talking about a matter here now. Hurt people, and William Kellibrew, who just shared his it is believable, but just, man, what a traumatic experience he went through. We're going to ask him about his coping skills, how he survived, and what he did to heal. Ron, hurt people that hurt people, how can they start to heal? What do they need to do to start healing, to reverse the pattern?
Well, one of the things that's interesting and what I elaborate on is like William's Kellibrew's situation. The difference between him and the young people that I work with, many of the young people I work with, he had services and a family wrapped around him. People came. He went through a lot of things. One of the things he didn't talk about, he eventually used drugs and things, but he had people. It wasn't easy being him.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want the people to think that, okay, it was just easy. He saw his mother get killed. He saw his brother get killed. It was just all right.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
He had a group of people who, for the rest of his life, were there for him to get over this. Right? And what happens in our community, we think that the young people are supposed to, after they see their friend get killed, their mother get killed, something dramatic happen in their life, the next day, they're just supposed to be normal.
Right.
That's the perception in our community, and that's not reality. But our children are faced with that every day because people don't care about them in most cases. So they don't get what happened in Columbine. They don't get what happened in Connecticut. They just have to live with the reality that they have to deal with this pain without somebody helping them. So what we did, we will help the family, because we know this trauma. Normally when it's trauma in the child, it's trauma in the family. And it's a holistic approach. And you empower them to use their experiences to do what he's doing right now. By helping people help you, like NAAA, that's part of the process of healing. By you taking your experience and helping other people, it heals you. That's one of the best things you can do when you talk about hurt people.
I've always believed that one of the best ways to try to learn something is to try to teach it. When you try to teach, you learn as you teach.
Exactly. That's how I healed. When I came home from prison, I started helping the same people I hurt. And that built me up. That gave me a platform. That gave me something to empower myself with. And not impose something negative on people, but something positive. And that's the same thing that this group of people, they need. When people are hurt, they need the tools to take this experience and use it in a productive way. They have to deal with, how do you cope with it when you have one of them days when it's just bad and you go back and think about, I don't have my mother here. I don't have my father here. Or that I was raped. Or that, my grandmother was ran over by a drunk driver. All these things, it's not no one particular type of way that it happens. dramatic and traumatic syndrome that hits people, it happens in all kinds of ways. It's not no one way that it happens.
Ron, I'm going to honor our agreement that we weren't going to talk politics, the race coming up or anything like that for D.C. I'm going to honor that.
Okay.
What I would like to ask you, though, because you're so passionate about this subject, you've been on both sides where you've been a hurt person that hurt people. And as a hurt person that hurt people, you paid a price. You came out and you reversed, your story is one where you reversed the trend.
Right.
And you started to, as a hurt person, you started to help people.
Yes.
So they wouldn't hurt anymore.
Right.
And you've been in the trenches. You've been in gang warfare and the rest, in the middle of it. So you got multiple people that are running for mayor now. What would be your advice to them about, look, in a perfect world, we'd eradicate all violent crime. But we don't live in a perfect world. So there's going to be, whoever becomes the mayor in 2014, violent crime is still going to exist.
Right.
When the crime happens where young kids, 10, 12, 14, 16, are so dramatically impacted, and they obviously have post-trauma, distress syndrome, and the rest. Look, if somebody is over in Libya or Iraq and they see their comrade, they see their infantry brother get killed, we talk about the treatment that they need and the impact. So when a kid in Southeast or Northwest or Northeast or Southwest gets killed and his friends or her friends see it, they need help. What would you say to the next person, specifically in D.C., that takes the office of mayor, how they should treat those kinds of issues?
First of all, I think we need to stop hiding the problem. Because the murder rate has gone down, we act like everything is all right. But of course, the Washington Post revealed a story that said we had over 39,000 shootings over
gunshots,
over like a 5-year period. Let me go a step deeper. From 2006 to 2010, and I talk about this in my book, Drinking Muddy Water, at the Washington Hospital Center, MedStar Shock Trauma Unit alone, 4,003 people were treated for violent injuries, okay? Out of those 4,003 people.
One hospital.
In one hospital, just one. All right? 1,438 were from gunshot wounds, over 1,300 were from stabbings, and another 1,200 from various assaults, right?
Right.
200 and I think 40-something died, only out of that number.
Right.
So you can imagine how much violence is going on, but because people are not dying because of good medicine, and because good work that was going on in the community, and now because of bulldozers, people kind of like don't make a big deal. 13 people were shot on North Capitol Street. Every 2 or 3 weeks you have a shooting where 4 or 5 people are shot, but maybe nobody dies. So it's not a big deal. So first of all, let's be real that we still have a problem in our community
of serious violence.
And you can't solve the problem if you don't acknowledge the problem. That's number one.
Right.
Number two, if we don't deal with the social, economic, and educational issues that breed what we see in our community, you can't solve the problem. And in our community, we know that based upon your zip code, we know what type of education you're going to get. We know based upon your zip code what type of services you're going to get. And we also know that our people in our communities are not being empowered to uplift themselves out of their community. You know one of the things I hate, Rock? We go, you be in Bennett Terrace, and you have all these people come to clean our neighborhood up. That's not empowering nobody.
Right.
When we did the stuff over there, we got the paint and the bags, and we're going to help you clean your own neighborhood up.
Right, and you're going to get involved.
Yeah, you're going to do it.
Right.
I'm not going to do your work, and then you throw the trash right back out there.
Right.
So we have to empower people to deal with their situations. And right now, there are a lot of people making money, all right, off of our problems, but they're not helping us solve our problems. So it keeps on happening over and over and over again. What we did, we helped people solve their problems. And sometimes, I'm just keeping it real, they say ain't no money in the cure.
Yeah.
Just like people talk about medicine, You know, people go to Africa every day, and they take what they call the witch doctors, medicines and herbs, and they bring them back over here and add some side effects to them, and then resell them.
Yeah.
See, but they'll tell you that these people are crazy and the stuff they do don't work, but they bring that same stuff over here and use it.
Well,
So, I mean,
yeah, and I want to echo that to the candidates for mayor that this previous administration has and I'll give them credit because they have. And this council has ensured that victim services, the Office of Victim Services within the mayor's office, their budget was kept the same. In fact, they increased the budget for victim services, which is a key thing. We need to continue to keep supporting victim services, and it's always up on the chopping block. It should never be on the chopping block.
Right.
Number two,
why?
It should never be on the chopping block because, for instance, let's take this city's numbers in terms of domestic violence. You know, we know that the national numbers are 1 in 3 women will have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. Well, in this city, we have 30,000 calls in 2011 that went toward domestic violence, and that's probably 50% reporting. Okay? Now, we're talking about women receiving those calls, but men very much don't report. They don't report these kinds of things, but it's happening all over. So we're not just saying men are just the perpetrators. We're talking about a society where we're focused on violence or force as a way of getting what we want done. And I think number two that they need to focus on is ensuring that those who are re-entering our community, their community, like Marshall Brent Williams.
When you say re-entering, you're talking about from some sort
prison
of,
or jail or from some sort of incarceration.
Right.
And when they come home, they need the resources, the services. My brother right now who served 18 months, my oldest brother served 18 months in prison. He's out. Well, he needs his family wrapped around him. That was the one difference that we had in terms of the difference how he re-assimilated into his community, by the way. Right. He needs the resources. And so to continue to do that, because about 50 to 70% of the individuals that are incarcerated who return back to their community also return back to prison. And then talk about being disconnected. One thing we talk about in trauma is trauma disrupts a sense of connection, control, and meaning. Mm-hmm. So if it disrupts a sense of connection, control, and meaning, when these guys are shipped out to the entire country, unlike if you're locked up in maybe Virginia, you might be able to visit your family member. For D.C., you're shipped out to Kentucky and to federal prisons. Yes, yeah. And so it also disrupts the connection even further. And so we're talking about, pushing people further into maybe violent behavior or that people just don't care about them. I mean, when you don't have your family.
William,
support.
if you could walk us a little bit through your journey after that 9 year, or after that experience you had at 9 years old, as he said, you went through the wilderness for a while.
Oh my gosh!
Can you share some of that?
Well, I think the wilderness was right when I walked out of that house. There was a sense of humiliation, and I carried that humiliation. Being the only person alive from that room, I carried that humiliation from that room, and of course my family just humiliated, embarrassed. How do you feel to go? And I had to go back to school. I went to KDC Lewis Elementary School, and I had to go back to school and go in the 5th grade. And our family strategy was simply to forget about it. We put all the photos away because you pull a photo out of my mom and just remember that she was killed. I mean, it's traumatic, and so you don't want to be traumatized. So our family thought, put it away. In fact, a family member told me, and she patted me on my back at 10 years old before the funeral even happened and said, "Baby, you're just going to have to forget about it." Ooh. Now, that's not a strategy we need to use. We need services. In fact, I met with...
She loved you. She loved you.
Oh, she loved me.
Just
bless her heart.
How to
she
help
just
you to cope.
didn't know how. We didn't know how to cope. And so she wasn't alone in that. And so, I went back to 5th grade, and imagine your 5th grade teacher saying, okay, stand up, everybody, tell us your name, and tell us, just show and tell us how your summer was.
Oh, my God.
And so for a 10-year-old in 5th grade, that's traumatic. Teachers can change that around, though. We can say, stand up and tell me your name and tell us about your summer, and you don't have to share if you don't want to. we need to give our children options like that. And this is an emerging practice that I'm working on now. It's called trauma-informed care, which is about 4 points, quick points. One, it's about the prevalence of trauma, understanding that the general population, Kessler did a study, the general population, 61% of men, 51% of women in the general population. It means everybody you walk past in the mall, you come in the restaurant, you walk past, more than half of those people have had at least one lifetime traumatic experience. And out of that number, those numbers, they probably have multiple traumatizations. So in being trauma-informed, being informed about the fact that more than half of the people you encounter could have a trauma, we simply do two things. One, we avoid re-traumatizing them if they've had trauma. And number two, if they haven't had trauma, we do no harm. So we've covered the bases. We don't call somebody out of their name. We don't jump out and yell at people out of a car. We already presume that the person that we're encountering or engaging has had a traumatic event, so we don't re-traumatize them. It's called universal precautions. We borrowed the public health model of universal precautions. So what do nurses do when they're in the hospital, or doctors do, or when you go visit your friend at the hospital? You cover you have a mask, or you use gloves, you sanitize. You already, to stop the threat of a spreading infectious disease, you do these things. It's called universal precautions. Well, just presume that everybody you encounter has had a trauma, and you won't get it wrong. Number two, understanding the role that trauma plays in our lives, because it plays a significant role, and it's why we may be able to be perpetuating humiliation.
If I could stop you there, Ron, knowing that I was going to have you on today, I came upon a situation a little while ago, and we talked about some really heady stuff right here, right now, and one could say depressing even. Please tell us, in the minute and a half that we have left, I ran into a young lady who was down on her luck. She got involved with Peaceaholics, and she's a scholar. It's one of many people whose lives your organization has touched that way. I think she was out of Boston.
She graduated from Smith College. She was one of the leaders of the Chopper City gang that was always in the newspapers in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
She just graduated from Smith College, and she's about to go get her Ph.D. And she graduated at the age of 22 with a master's.
Yeah, and she and part of her life in the past was banging.
Banging, traumatizing other females, parents, men, everything. They got it in. They were more gangster than a lot of these guys in the city. But their father died from cancer, and we promised him that we would raise his three girls.
Yeah.
And all three of them graduated from college. All three of them are working, doing great things, and that's what they need. It's support systems that we need to put back in our community.
Yeah, healing
the village.
Healing and recovery is possible. Don't think that it's not possible.
Exactly.
It is possible for every single person.
You know, I want to thank Jesse Jackson. I want to thank Jesse Jackson for inviting me to their panel yesterday, because that's where I saw you two guys.
Yep.
And I'm going to tell you something, guys. We've had a lot of high-profile people on here, some very interesting subjects. This is one of my favorite, absolutely. This is one of my favorite hour broadcasts. I want to thank both of you so much for coming. And I want to keep the lines of communication open to have you guys back, because you do an invaluable work in the community and around
So much more to talk about.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank
Appreciate
both
it.
of you
All
so much. Ron, William Kellibrew. Thanks. Folks, thanks for tuning in this hour. Coming up next, the incredible one, William.